It's a funny thing, sitting to record these videos. The moments where you reach the end of it and then realize that you hadn't pressed record. So I'm sharing that with you because that's what's just happened. So I shall now start again. I wonder how different this discourse will be on the one that I've just finished giving on the very same subject. So I spoke recently on the subject of spiritual care and spiritual self-care within the context of facing the end of life and going through the process of death and dying. It's a very important subject, very challenging, and one that I think is worthy of a deeper reflection than we are perhaps inclined to give it, which is partly why I gave that talk. Now, here I would like to start a dialogue on what I consider to be the profound importance of honouring life, honouring our precious human life as sacred. And with that, or within that, explore the importance of generating loving regard for ourselves and others. Many of you are engaging in this course that I'm presenting currently, entitled Love as the Path, taking love as the path out of suffering. So of course within that we will be exploring deeply what is the true nature of love itself and how it is we mature our relationship to that. But as many of you will know, over the last year I faced very challenging or significant challenges to my physical and mental well-being that I'm only now really beginning to recover from. And it put me on a journey of deep reflection, one which I've done before, into the sacred and profound nature of this precious life that we have. But at a deeper level than perhaps I had previously been prompted to explore. In a way, it's ironic, isn't it? Because it happens so many times that we don't fully appreciate what we've got until we're faced with having it taken away. And that's often the case as we approach the end of the life and we recognize it's about to be taken away from us, and only then do we start to make reflection, what if only, and all of these kinds of things. Whilst I recognize that I had been extremely grateful, felt profound gratitude for life, it's nevertheless the case that I had taken it for granted because I was so fortunate to be blessed with reasonable physical health and good mental health. Now, many people don't have that, and I've been through a period of not having that, and I want to share some of my reflections, or the reflections and realizations that are born of having stripped away the things that we take for granted, and indeed the things that we absolutely depend upon when we think about how we might live a full, awakened, engaged, fulfilling, realized expression of our life. I think that the lack of regard for self, and thereafter the lack of regard that we might be prompted to show to others on its account, is the single greatest cause of suffering, and the one that we should look most deeply into the heart of. The failure to recognize how profoundly sacred just life itself, to be alive, and particularly to be born as a human being, how extraordinarily rare, unfathomably rare it is that we're here. It is the failure to recognize what life is, what we are in essence, that is the fundamental ground for our willingness to disrespect, disregard its sacred nature, and to not care profoundly for our life and the life of others. If the world is in a state of conflict, if humanity is in a state of conflict, struggling to make sense of its predicament, it is singularly on account of the lack of regard that we have shown individually and at a group level of consciousness for what our life is and what life is. And it is the reclaiming of this profound reverence for the sacred nature of life, I believe, that is the path out of suffering. It's, if you like, it's the other side of the coin that the Buddha presents when he teaches us sabbe sankhara dukkati, all conditioned things are suffering. Our tendency to impose our will upon things and condition the outcome by the imposition of that will, that is the root of suffering. Life itself is not inherently suffering. There is suffering involved in being born, growing sick because of the wear and tear of being here, and passing away at the end of life. This is the cost of being born as a human, or being born in a physical dimension, like the human realm. Every creature on this planet has to carry the burden of the body that it inhabits so that it can have this life. It's not easy, it's challenging. But when the very, very rare occurrence of coming into being with the conscious capacity to be aware of what we are a part of, when this happens, which is what it is to be a human, when this happens, it is the singularly most rare and precious occurrence in all of creation. And it is the willingness, once gifted with that extraordinary experience and capacity, to realize what we are and to engage fully and consciously into it. It is the failure to recognize that leads us into the untold misery that we find ourselves in. And all of it is rooted in the fact that we are willing to surmount our loving regard for self and others in the pursuit of something that we want, or in the rejection of what it is that we face in our lives. Now, when we are faced with extraordinary challenge, like losing our mental faculties, losing the physical ability to uphold our life properly, in those moments we experience what it is to be less fortunate. Now, two things can happen in that moment. We can fall into a state of despair, despondency. We can reject the experience that we are having. We can consider ourselves to be a victim of misfortune. We can use it as an excuse to not honor our life and do whatever we can to make it whatever we can. And in that moment, we cast aside, we reject, we abandon the profound opportunity that being alive presents us with. Or we can look into the heart of what is happening to us. Take it on at every level, and this works at every level, regardless of what it is that we encounter as misfortune or what we consider to be our suffering. At every level this works. Whether you've just not succeeded in something that you had really wanted to succeed in, whether you found yourself physically incapacitated, or whether you found yourself mentally incapacitated, but it still remains within you the ability to recognize what's happening to you. For as long as it remains within us the capacity to recognize what is happening to us, then we have within our hand the opportunity to turn what is happening into a lesson that elevates us into a higher state of consciousness and being. So we can reject our suffering, and in doing so quite possibly inflict more suffering upon ourselves and others. Or we can embrace it, turn into it, and use it as an opportunity to elevate ourselves. Now, if you're listening to this and you're able to understand this, that alone is a sign that you are blessed with extraordinary good fortune, because your mind is still intact enough to reflect upon the nature of your existence. It doesn't matter how much physical or mental suffering you're going through. That single thing alone means the door out of suffering is still there for you to walk through. And I say this because there do and does and often come about situations and circumstances where that door is closed. Not forever, but momentarily within the context of a life that we are having, because we lose our capacity to be aware of what is happening to us. And this is what is called ignorance. There is a point where we fall into such ignorance, maybe on account of misfortune. It means our mental faculties are so compromised that we cannot reflect deeply upon the nature of our life. But for as long as we remain able to do so, it doesn't matter how much or what suffering we are encountering, we can free ourselves from that suffering. And not only that, we can enter into a state of grace that elevates us to a genuine state of awakening. So, every moment that you are breathing and conscious of how you feel, what's going on in your life, regardless of how challenging it is, every moment that you are that conscious, You are one of the most fortunate beings in all of creation. And even if that experience that you're having is on the threshold of being unbearable, for as long as it is bearable and you are able to be aware of what is happening, you could free yourself. Now, the Buddha talks of an age of darkness, where the mental faculties of humans degenerate to the point where they cannot understand any longer the nature of their existence, and create such suffering that is genuinely unbearable. While we are born in a time of good enough fortune, or enough good fortune, to reflect upon the consequences of our actions and to make choices about how we live and behave, we are not in an age of darkness. And we can free ourselves, and we can free others. The period of time, the frequency within which human life appears in those circumstances is so brief, the period of time that it does not appear like that in those circumstances is so long that to not honor it as sacred while we are living it as such is one of the weightiest things we will do, we could do. And every act of disregard for ourselves, no matter how much pain it is rooted in, we should look deeply into, address, and end. And do everything that we can to end such lack of regard for ourselves that we would harm ourselves through the way in which we conduct our lives. And that can happen in countless ways. The choices that we make about how we live are a reflection of our willingness or unwillingness to harm ourselves. Now, we may even say, but sometimes it's necessary to put ourselves in harm's way on behalf of others. Well, if we should choose to do that in a moment where a situation that might warrant it arises, then of course that remains our right and freedom to do so. But in the process of pursuing what we want, or rejecting the experiences that we have had, regardless of how challenging, if in that moment, or those moments, in those processes, or through doing that, we neglect the sacred nature of our life, and in some way allow it to degenerate through lack of regard, then we are accumulating the karma that leads to misfortune or a reduction in our good fortune in the future. It is as simple as that. In order to experience life in its highest capacity, in all its beauty and wonder, it is first necessary to have a profound and loving regard for it. The degree to which we surrender, negate, neglect, and ultimately abuse that loving regard is a reflection, or will be reflected in the way in which life around us and our life degenerates, and thereafter the degree of suffering, mental and physical, that we experience. The only way to avoid suffering, apart from the suffering that is an inevitable part of life, which is the suffering of being born, occasionally getting unwell, and having to leave this life behind at death. The only way to avoid more suffering than that is to every second of our life to remember that it is a profound gift, even if it is now currently extremely hard. There are ways, there is a path, there is a pathway, there are conditions that lead to a fortunate, free from suffering existence, in which we can truly delight in the extraordinary nature of life itself. And if we create those conditions, we will experience the divine nature of what our life is, in all its wonder, and we will experience what true love, gratitude, appreciation, and compassion are. It is always available to us. In any moment, within any experience that we're having, even in our most challenging. I remember going through a period last year where to go to bed every night was extremely challenging and stressful on account of the uncertainty around whether unconsciously, the uncertainty about whether I was going to make it through the night. Now, this isn't based upon any rational medical diagnosis. That's what happens when one faces an existential challenge that one does not know we have the strength to forbear. And that can happen in any number of circumstances, and it doesn't need to equate to a genuinely physically life-threatening scenario. So, anyone who faces uncertainty around the continuity of their lives, whether it is psychological or genuinely physiological, anyone who faces the fear that their life may not be sustained on account of disruption, damage, harm done, illness of any kind, injury, impairment, this is an extremely vexing thing. I understand that now. I've been there. Many of you will be there. Many of you might be there now or have been in the past. And so what I want to say is this. As we face what might be a state of despair, where we do not know whether we can cope anymore with what is happening to us, there is within that moment an opportunity to even then remember what life is, and just to remember that we have been a part of it. And whatever your happy thought is, even if it was the most fleeting of moments within the time span of your life, we should turn to that and remember it with profound gratitude. And even if it lasted for no longer than an in and out breath, we should say thank you in that moment for the fact that we even experienced it. It is easy to dwell on our misfortune when things are not going well and forget completely the extraordinary thing that life is. And if it is the case that we have experienced, or we feel we have experienced suffering from the very beginning of our life, right the way through, and have never experienced a transcendent sense of joy or happiness, then the most noble thing we can do is to recognize that there is a state of joy and happiness that is available to a human being when we reach a state of profound love for ourselves and others, that others may have experienced even if we have not. And if in that moment we can generate a sense of appreciative joy for the good fortune of others, without any sense of resentment for the hardship we are facing, we generate within our mind stream one of the most noble qualities of mind of all. A profound generosity of spirit and appreciative joy at the good fortune of others. And that alone may be strong enough, may be powerful enough to elevate us out of our despair and start us on a change of direction within our lives. One thing is absolutely for certain. The hardship that we are facing in any given moment simply is what it is. It isn't going away on account of the fact we don't want it. Now, we might not yet fully understand this, but the more we practice, the more insight arises within us, the more we come to see as a certainty that misfortune only becomes good fortune when we generate a wholesome mental state in the face of it. And good fortune always becomes misfortune when we generate an ignoble or unwholesome mental state in the face of it. Our negligence towards ourselves and others whilst we are blessed with good fortune is the ground for the transition out of good fortune into misfortune in the future. It's as simple as that. Our failure to honor and respect our life and the life of others while we are blessed with good fortune is the condition by which that good fortune wanes. It's as simple as that. Our despair, anger, aversion, resentment, dismay, bitterness, whatever it is, our unwholesome mind in the face of the challenge that we face is always petrol upon a fire that is already burning. It is as simple as that. There is no way to put out a fire by putting petrol on it. Our acceptance, openness, appreciation of the good fortune of others, forbearance in the face of difficulties, loving regard for ourselves, a deep and profound commitment to do everything we can to reclaim the faculties by which we can experience good fortune. All of these wholesome mental states, if we can find them in the face of adversity, that is water on a fire. And it is in this way and only in this way that we turn suffering into its cessation. That we transition out of a state of darkness, if you like, the darkness of suffering and despair, into the light of liberation and peace. This is a universal principle. It doesn't work in favor of one person or another. It is always and everywhere the same. There is nothing we can do to change that. But what we can do is change our attitude to the fact that that is how life is. It is far easier to come to suffering than it is to free ourselves from it. It is far easier to dishonor life than it is to honor it. But we can honor it. We can appreciate it. We can every second, even in our darkest moments, appreciate the fact that it is unfathomably rare and contains within it the most extraordinary capacities, potentials, opportunities, which we may not yet have realized or experienced. But for as long as we can remember, I am that, and honor it, we can free ourselves. But the moment we stop honoring it and continue, for whatever reason it might be, to inflict hardship and pain and suffering on ourselves and others, then that suffering will not end. It won't end by chance. It won't end because we want it to end. It will end because we create within us the grounds by which it ends. If you look out at the world now and you see suffering that you cannot bear to behold, or if you look inwards and see within yourself suffering that you do not know whether you can forbear, all of it somewhere is rooted in the fact that we surrendered our loving regard for ourselves and our loving regard for others into a willingness to harm ourselves or to be negligent towards ourselves or others. Be that in the pursuit of something else that we wanted other than happiness and peace, or be that because we were so in conflict with what we found or find within our lives or in the world at large. Whether it is rooted in greed or aversion, it does not matter. The outcome is always the same. Every time we fail to honor life as sacred, we suffer. Every time we rediscover and reinstill within ourselves a profound loving regard for life as sacred, the path out of suffering opens for us, no matter how much suffering we face. And if we hold in our hearts, if we hold it, if it is the banner by which we define our lives, that there is nothing I would do to harm myself or others, regardless of how much I want something, regardless of how much I feel I am suffering or have suffered. If there is no willingness, if there is a complete unwillingness to harm ourselves or others, it is a certainty that in time our suffering will end, and the suffering that we cause others will end. This is the path out of suffering. There is no other path than that. So whatever we face, individually and as groups, or as a species, our future hinges upon that, and that alone. There is no act of will. There is no expression of human ingenuity that is going to end suffering. That and that alone brings suffering to cessation. And though it may not happen instantly, though it may take a very long time, it is only our commitment to that, to the honoring of that, our unwillingness to harm ourselves or others, and the honoring of life as sacred, that will free us. So, you may be in service, doing your best for others, but in some way being negligent towards your own needs. Rest, my friends. When you need rest, take it. You are of no use to anyone if you allow yourself to become deeply incapacitated on account of lack of regard for yourself. So honor your life, take care of yourself, rest deeply if you are exhausted, recover from whatever it is you have been through with a love for yourself, a deep, profound gratitude and respect for life and every aspect of it. And slowly and surely, without doubt, that darkness, that pain, that suffering, that despair, that confusion that you experience will end. Feel inside your heart now. And if you have failed to do so in the past, then start now to generate a loving regard for yourself. My life is sacred. It is truly precious. I honor it with love. I shall care for myself lovingly. May I be happy and peaceful and free from suffering. Sukhino ha kemino hontu, sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata. May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. Love is the ground, the foundation, the creative principle that allows life to flourish. When it is lacking, life does not flourish. It wanes, it withers as a parched flower. For as long as there is life flowing through you, no matter how withered you might feel, parched, dry, incapacitated, you can always nourish yourself with the water of love. It remains within you to flourish again. It may take patience. It may take courage and grace, but it is a certainty that for as long as life flows through you and you meet that life with love, you will express that life in ever more beautiful ways. So feel from your heart with gratitude, even in the face of your suffering, for this precious human life and the opportunity it presents. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. May I come to know and experience the true nature of love. Suki no wake me no honru. Sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata. May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy.